It's always a pleasure for me to come at the CFA in February, and I've come to realize with this job how February is such an important month. So earlier in the month, we do the Future Food conference that we had a couple of weeks ago, and we had about 900 leaders from across the industry in Ottawa. And then a few weeks later, we get to all get together at the CFA. So I find February very energizing, right, to really set the tone for the rest of the year. Last year, when I came up, for those that were present, I facilitated a panel with some of our young farmers. And I don't know, well, I recall because at the end, one of them gave me some real good constructive feedback in front of all of you. But I thought it was very pertinent because the feedback was to FCC and to others how, we tend to talk about young farmers as the next generation. But the point was the generation's here now, right? And if we keep on thinking of a concept of them in the future, when you take a look at how many farmland has and assets have to transfer, we're kind of missing the boat. So that the message was we have to activate that. The other thing that's been going on, and I don't have to remind anybody in this room, last year was a pretty tough year, I think, for everybody, particularly in this sector, with all the uncertainty. And, to some of the comments that Bruce was making around how do you kind of stand up and tell an economic story? How do you kind of really convey your message out there? How do you kind of make that link between the farmer and the sector as a whole from an industry and an economic potential? All of these things kind of came to play or came together last year. And I have to say, since I've started my job and gone across the country many times, there's a couple of things that I think every time I go out and I meet a customer, I hear. And the one message I always hear is, well, two actually. One is, can you help us in terms of conveying our message to Ottawa? So what role can FCC play in that regard? But the other one that's always stayed with me is about, can you help us tell the story? Right? The story of what can this sector bring to Canada, what it already does and what the potential is. What are some of the individuals that are part of that sector? And ultimately, what's the economic significance? So as the year last year kind of unfolded, we actually decided at FCC that we were going to tackle this, right? We took a look at all the strengths that the sector has, and I won't repeat some of the many things that Bruce shared with you in terms of how much does it represent in terms of job in this country, what's the potential, and all of those things. But I also think we can't ignore some of the challenges that we have, and certainly being able to tell the story has been one of them. So before Scott comes and joins me on stage, I'd like to present a video to you. This is a video that we launched a couple of weeks back at the Future of Food. And as I was talking to the crowd of 900, mostly from industry, I asked them two things. I asked them, watch this video, not as somebody that's been in the industry for 25 years, right? Or if you grew up on a farm and you still have a farm operation, watch the video as a Canadian first, right? Bring that mindset to the table. And as you're watching it, and hopefully it'll have a positive impact on you, hopefully you'll be able to see the pride that we're trying to generate through some of the images that all of you folks in this room help to create every day. So with that, why don't we cue up the video? So Scott, I think Scott and I are going to have a little chat about the video you just saw. So, as I mentioned 3 weeks ago, we launched, I guess, this movement, or where would you like me to?
Wherever you would like.
I get to choose where I put. And yeah, so we launched this movement, Let's Grow Canada. And I guess maybe just right off the top, I asked people to watch it as a Canadian because the goal with this initially is to really reach out to all Canadians, to be able to ignite an emotion and in a way, hopefully get them to fall in love again with some of the great things that the sector produces. And I just want to say, I recognize that some of the images on that video may not necessarily represent what folks in industry, depending on which subsector you present, depending what you want to portray. So this is very much intended to go and capture an emotion out of Canadians to then see where we go from there. But Scott, you have some questions for me, so I should turn it over to you.
I do. Thank you, Justine. And first and foremost, I mean, I think it's a great video. And certainly, I mean, the synergies we see between the branding of Let's Grow Canada and coincidentally, much of the work we as a sector have been doing around that same banner, I mean, is self-evident. And so I think it's a great opportunity we had today to really dig a little deeper into this because this is all very fresh and new and
Yeah.
exciting. And I think it's great to hear, as we just heard from Bruce as well, this moment we have together to speak to Canadians on terms that maybe weren't there or available to us previously. And I think certainly my first kind of question at this is maybe along the same lines as what Bruce alluded to in his previous presentation. From your perspective, like why is right now the right time for Canada to be sharing this kind of strong, bold vision around Canadian agri-food? And what's the opportunity you really see there?
Yeah, so I guess there's two things I think that are, and I want to really dig into the sector opportunity. And I think everybody in this room knows with some of the major investments that have been announced, ag and food hasn't necessarily been top of the list in terms of those investment, right? And we know that whether it's super important in terms of infrastructure and different investments that we know are going to take place, but I know even Scott and I have talked about this, where the reality is that the output or the result of those investments, we're probably not going to see for 10 and 15 years, right? Just because they take time to be able to build. And what other better time than ag and food? Because ag and food could have impact every day, right? So there's an opportunity, certainly at FCC, that we see in terms of how we show up in this moment while people are waiting from some of these major outputs to really go in there and not just capture the heart of Canadians, but also to be able to showcase the economic potential and value that the sector brings all the time. So that's kind of one of the areas. And two, I think the rest of the world, at the risk of sounding maybe a little bit apple pie and motherhoodish, is I think the rest of the world is looking to Canada to say, step up, and we're going to back you. Do I need to bring back the terrible morning we all had on the weekend when we all got up at 8 to watch the game? And I won't talk about the end of the score, but I don't know about you, but certainly one thing that really struck me, that entire stadium was voting for Canada. Like you could hear the roars about let's go Canada, let's go Canada. And I would share with you, I think that's what the world and how they feel about us. And it's a great opportunity for this sector to step into it.
Oh, that's a great answer. And I think certainly, I mean, we feel very much the same. And I think you'll have heard that echoed through the comments through the day in all of our various sessions. And I think in that same vein, I attended Future of Food a couple of weeks ago, and it was a great event, first and foremost. So thank you for convening that. I think it was an excellent session. And similarly built that same sort of energy I think we're starting to feel in this room and across the sector in general. But I will say the one question I think that comes to mind immediately is a year ago, we were having very similar conversations around an ongoing initiative we're doing with the Canadian Centre for Food Integrity.
Yep.
Around public awareness raising around Canada's food system. And I'd love to hear from your perspective, with this new launch of a new movement, what does that mean for FCC's involvement in that other campaign? And how do you see the two playing together at the end of the day?
Yeah, I don't know. So I love that you asked me the question because it gives me a little bit of chance to talk a bit more about the movement, right? So, and again, in the presentation we just saw, I think Bruce highlighted something that's really important is if you're gonna consider going out there in the market and creating something new, you can get a 10x impact if you join a conversation versus if you try to start something fresh. Okay. So that was one of the first things when we started to look at what was going on in the market. Many, whether it's your specific association or you're trying to bring people together, there is a lot of conversation going on about a variety of topics that touch ag and food. So from FCC's point of view, it was less about let's create a new one and make that one the one versus how can we lean on what's already out there. So when we did the launch at the Future of Food and in terms of Let's Grow Canada, there's a website also, letsgrowcanada.ca. For those en français, the tagline en français is On sort du rang. In terms of speaking to that audience. And the way we positioned it is think of it as this is Let's Grow Canada is the window to the sector. So, and what I mean by that is we've said a few times in this conference about how many different conversations are taking place, how many different issues are discussed. And the unintended impact or the reality of that, it's hard for our audiences to understand where to go to find their information, right? So by trying to do it together and by pooling the traffic through Let's Grow Canada, then that audience can come in through one common door because we'd be doing it together. And then from that door, they can get into the conversations that all of you are creating. So to be clear, the goal of Let's Grow Canada is not to create the content that each and every one of you are actually very good at doing. First of all, there's a bit of a bank that I have to run, and we don't that's not our core expertise. But the reality is too is that it gives us an opportunity to actually really pool our efforts together to be that one voice that, also I think Bruce was commenting on earlier in terms of we'll be stronger if we're speaking from one than if 400 of us are all trying to have our individual conversations. So view Let's Grow Canada as that door. And what we positioned certainly when we were at the Future of Food is the goal is to be able to co-create with each and every one of you. So it's to be able to live side by side with you so that if you click Let's Grow Canada and you go on the menu, you can either see specific stories of folks within the industry in the different sectors. If you want to learn about how does the food system work in Canada, click CFI. So we are very much complementary and in order to be able to demonstrate with all the great attributes that Canada has, how can Canada as a whole grow and amplify it? It's not there to replace it. And FCC was one of the founders of that initiative on the public trust and on the Canada's food system. We continue to be there. So for us, it's very much how you bring the two together side by side. And we don't see why that wouldn't be able to continue.
Great. That's good to hear. I think because there's a lot of questions out there as you've been quite active and to the betterment of our sector, I think certainly in raising the profile and the energy you're bringing to this discussion in general. But maybe, shifting gears a little bit, we are seized with the energy and the enthusiasm and the excitement, and I think you are an excellent advocate for that and a spokesperson in that regard. But I was at that same Future of Food event and listening to Dominic Barton speak, and the point he raised, I think very articulately, was now's not the time to talk, we need action. And how do you translate or see this storytelling exercise translate from talk to action? And in that, what do you see groups like CFA, our member organizations in the sector, like what role can we play in that exercise to make sure that this isn't just noise and sound, that it translates to meaningful action that actually drives benefits for our sector and for Canada as a whole?
Yeah. So when we started to take a look at this question and seeing what could we do in order to help tell the story, we said, okay, like with any different initiative, and I do want to be clear, we don't see this as a campaign, right? So the difference between a campaign versus a movement, a campaign, you decide on a budget, you say, hey, I want to do a splash, whether it's, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, and you try to attract as much attention on kind of one or a set of issues. A movement tends to start from the ground up, okay? So you want to try to get your audiences to engage with you, which is why we're starting with this video, because we really believe that there's an opportunity for Canadians, recognizing that food affordability is top of mind, but there's an opportunity for Canadians to fall in love with this sector again, and food can really bring people together. So when we looked at it, we said we're going to give ourselves 4 objectives. So the one is about building pride. The second one is about attracting investment to the sector, and I think we're going to talk about that. Another one is about growing trade, also the demand for our food. And the fourth one, which we know is a big issue, is about attracting talent to the sector. So we figured if you connect the pride to the talent question as an example, and you go out there and we portray the great things that the sector does, the innovation that's in the sector, the technology that's involved, we believe that we can have impact on the interest of people to come to the sector. So we're starting with the pride element of it, and that was part of the launch. But there's a whole set of initiatives that have been planned out to respond to those four buckets of KPIs that we're going to track over time.
And from your point earlier, this is not a campaign as such, it's a movement. So the intention is that the sector will organically sort of adopt those measures and pick it up and use it to their own purposes to what is a shared objective at the end of the day here.
Yeah, exactly. And part of the thinking behind that is if you take some of the images or all of the images actually in the video, it was 13 days of filming between Regina, Saskatchewan, Atlantic Canada, the Yukon, British Columbia, right? And we got over 40 hours of footage. All of the customers, and they were not necessarily all FCC customers that were filmed, we gave all of them back the footage. So certainly when I started internally with the team, I said, this has to be 125% Canadian. So the way we're going about doing it, I would say, is very Canadian as much as the output of it. And that's kind of how we're starting to build that momentum to then get us into, I'll say, the more economically tangible items. But doing it in partnership with the different associations is very much how we want to get there.
Right. And so maybe building on that point you just raised about talent attraction for the sector. I mean, certainly one of the through lines we've heard through a lot of our conversations today, I mean, there's 2 sides to that equation in terms of talent. There's the workforce side of it, and then there's the owner operator and succession side as well. And so maybe harkening back to your point that, yeah, at the end of the day, FCC is still a financial institution and has another really critical mandate for our sector in that respect. With $50 billion expected to transfer hands over the next 10 years or so in that intergenerational shift from one demographic to the next, how do you see FCC playing a part in that and facilitating that? Because ultimately, I think there is this very real question of, yes, we see a lot of opportunity, but it's certainly colored with immense uncertainty right now, and that can really weigh heavily on people's investment decisions and their plans. So where do you see FCC playing a part in that side of the talent attraction equation?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So let's talk finances for a couple of minutes. So a couple of years ago, I know I stood at this conference and we talked a little bit about the new strategy where FCC wanted to go. And I would have probably shared with you, if somebody said, Justine, you've got 3 words to describe how does FCC want to show up? And those 3 words is we want it to be more bold, we want it to be a catalyst, and we want it to build for resilience. So the boldness comes from recognizing that as different needs of all of you change, and they're changing faster and faster, FCC has an opportunity to show up in the market to be able to either it's a support, whether it's through challenging tariff environment, whether it's because we need to invest more in innovation, or whether it's frankly new products and services. So on the transition piece, we had a transition loan in the market. I think it's been out for about 10 years. But everybody in this room knows with the rising prices of land and inputs, you name it, and I don't think it's FCC either. The financial institutions can't keep up with the lending that you need to put out there in order for that transition to be facilitated. But then what we said is we were struggling to be able to say, what could we do that would be fundamentally different, that would really make an impact? So challenged the team to go back to the drawing board, and they did. And we came out a few months ago with a new transition loan. And to me, what I love about this product is the team really, I think, did a great job to try to understand both sides of the equation. So for one, to the seller, right, that's selling this asset, well, they want to know that they're going to get the value that they should. And in most times, if it's within the family, you want to have a prediction of income, right? So you don't necessarily want the $5 million today, but you want to know that you're going to get it. And how do you bridge the two? to the young farmer that's buying into the product, the property, excuse me, it's that when you look at the size of the boring that you have to do and the interest, you're going, how am I going to ever make it? So what the team did is via FCC providing a guarantee, which is something that we did not do before. We've structured a product where if you took, for example, a $5 million loan to intergenerational loan, we would actually guarantee the seller. So having predictability of principal over 10 years. So think of $500,000 increments every year for 10 years. So if you think about that, that happens over a period of 10 years, compare it to if you buy your residential mortgage. When you buy your house, right? You buy a house for $1 million, you start paying interest on $1 million from day one. The bulk of what you pay is interest. And what is it? The last 10 years is really eating your principal. By spreading out the principal payment to the seller and adding it over time to the purchaser, we're able to, on a $5 million loan, have the buyer save up to $2.7 million of interest and pay that loan faster by almost 7 years. So all of a sudden, getting the right people in the room to really try to understand, like, what is the challenge of those two parties that are coming together, and what's the way in which FCC can play? Our role in that is, notwithstanding that we do a loan, is that guarantee of those principal payments to the seller, right? Because that's the risk, right? The longer you wait, the higher the risk that you might not get paid. Of course, we can say, within family, those things always work out, but still you don't know. But that would be an example, Scott, of how, by taking a look at some of the existing products we have or new ones that need to make, we're trying to show up differently. And I asked the team before I came over, because the product's been out for about 4 or 5 months, and 50% of, I'll say, the loans that have been approved are all by young farmers. That is significantly higher than it was before. So it's giving us the indication that, like, we've put out something in the market that has an impact. Is it going to solve all the problem? No. But I think hopefully by us trying to come up with something more creative and taking that risk on a 10-year term, because that is fundamentally for the financial institution, what we're putting out there, that it can make a real impact.
Okay, that's great to hear, because I think ultimately there's nothing more, I think, frustrating to hear than the sense that, well, the uncertainty we're dealing with today and the questions about profitability are holding people back that are dedicated to this sector from taking the step and investing in the future. Because I think, you can do all you can on every facet of policy and programs, but if we can't keep people attracted to this sector, viewing profitability in the future and seeing themselves through the uncertainty, it's very challenging to see a future for this industry that seizes the kind of opportunity that I think we all can see ahead of us. And maybe in that, working through the transition from one generation to the next, there's obviously the taking on of debt, and debt servicing is one facet of that. But I think at a time where we're seeing such immense uncertainty in geopolitical circles, trade, tariffs, daily sort of churn of tariffs, and who knows, as of the last hour, whether that ground has changed. But certainly in that, I think there's a long-term game that we're all cognizant of, which is market diversification, that we need to go further, invest in value added, find new opportunities, but none of that happens overnight.
Correct.
And so I think there's sort of two sides in terms of capital needs for our sector through this. One is the sort of long-term patient capital to help us invest in these assets and infrastructure to get us through that process. And that, I think, is much more of a value chain exercise. But there's also the more immediate short-term operating capital needs that farmers face on a daily basis. And we've all seen prices, depending on what you produce in the country, stagnating to some extent over time, while input costs remain quite high. How do you see FCC balancing that moving forward to make sure that, to your point, we've all seen the announcements of capital recently, and that's really exciting for the sector. But we can't lose sight of the short-term needs either. And so from FCC's perspective, how do you sort of serve both of those needs, recognizing that you're clearly, as with this movement and the other campaigns, very invested in the long-term future of our sector as well?
Yeah, so I'm going to try to do my best to answer your question. I know you'll keep me honest if I don't. But I want to maybe kick off by giving you a couple of stats. And then I actually literally got this today. And I just want to read to this audience some feedback that we got. And to kick off is, I can very much appreciate that, when you hear something like the announcement we did a couple of weeks back, FCC came out in May of last year and we said we want to invest $2 billion in the sector by 2030, right? And that announcement literally went around the globe many, many times. And then a couple of weeks ago, we said we got a coalition together of 20 investors, and they've committed that they're going to put $5 billion into the sector. So the 5 plus 2 becomes $7 billion. Now, I don't know about you, and if anybody in this room can challenge me, please go ahead. But we were trying to figure out when's the last time did this sector get such a big announcement? And we were struggling to go back 10, 15, 20, 25 years. I said at the conference in my lifetime, but there's a time where I wasn't necessarily that close to ag, but it's been a long time, if ever, that we've ever had that much excitement about the sector. The second thing I think that's, for me, that's really, I don't want to say promising because it's more than promising. It's a huge vote of confidence that I think is worth sharing with this news, is that of these 20 investors, many of them don't invest normally in ag and food. That to me was the biggest news, right? Because you've got the usual suspects, as we call them, that come to the table because they know the sector and all that stuff. But we're actually having impact on those that, and it doesn't mean that they don't think about ag and food, but because of the uniqueness of it, the complexity of it, the saying that I often tell the team is, you're an investor and you're trying to have a diversified portfolio and you're in Canada. Yeah, you're probably going to think about ag and food. Where is ag and food going to stack in your top 10? It's probably number 7, right? Number 7 because it's a little different than the others. It's not quite manufacturing. It's kind of unique. It has its own cycles. So, but you kind of know at the back of your head it's important. So what happens when, you're at the end of the second quarter, you're taking a look at your results, you got to deliver for your shareholders, and you're like, okay, we got to make choices, right? We probably all face that situation at midpoint in the year. What happens to priorities 7, 8, 9, and 10? You typically punt them to the next year, right? You'll say, we'll really focus on our top 5 or our top 6 because we know that we can deliver. Let's drive what we can out of those. And the next ones, we'll move them to next year. So you know what we're trying to do at FCC? We're trying to move that place 7 to number 5, 3, and hey, I'm a dreamer, number 1. So, because we say if it's going to be number 5, it's going to be in the top 6 that are going to get done. So having those investors come to the table, we believe has made progress on that. The second thing is the book of FCC, and everybody in this room knows we've been around since 1959, right? So $63 billion, 80% of our book are loans that are 1.5 million or less. That's over 60,000 transactions. And 60% of that are loans under 200,000. So I want folks in this room to know we are very much about the individual farmer, right? Starting there. And then I recognize that it's tough when you say a number as big as 5 billion. Okay, like how is it going to impact me, right? So how we've started to do some of those investments. Sometimes we've gone to funds, and sometimes we'll go direct. And what I wanted to quickly read, if you allow me to tell a quick story, Scott, because I read it and I said to the team, I have to bring this to the CFA and read this to them. This is feedback from an organization in which we invested in, and to give them a chance to do more of what they do. And they're giving feedback on FCC Capital, the alliances program that we have, and the opportunity that it presents. So this is here it goes. It says, hey, Louis, I wanted to reach out and thank you for inviting us to that event in February. That was the conference a couple of weeks ago. And more broadly, share how impactful FCC and all aspects of it have been to DYM through our early growth. So that's direct yield market. We've been able to transact with 2 of those enterprises and saved each of them roughly $20,000. So $20,000 to some may not be that much, but to others it makes a big difference, which has made a genuine difference for those farmers. However, that impact will grow significantly for those regions as these farmers begin selling to their neighbors in future years. FCC Capital support enabled one of our partners to build their warehouse in Saskatchewan, and through that location alone, they've already moved over $3 million and saved growers in the Battleford area, hopefully there's somebody from Battleford here, approximately $600,000. The FCC Alliance partnership has been instrumental in our growth as well. Having available directly through our platform makes it safer for farmers to secure capital before product is on the farm, and we're grateful for that collaboration. And it goes on. So the reason I brought this is because I very much hope that you can see from some of the efforts we're trying to do that for us, it does start at the farm, right? But sometimes your influence or your ability to get to that direct piece can start with different partners. So we've got our field staff across Canada in our 100 branches connecting with farmers all the time. But we also have those strategies that we're looking to influence along the supply chain. And that's how we feel we can really maximize the impact.
That's great, because I think there is obviously, I mean, with all the excitement and attention on the new movement and the new announcement, there is always that question that follows us. Is this a reflection of you deviating or changing course and losing that core mandate that I think farmers have long valued here, which is that sense of being there for the farm level needs and managing some of those shorter term capital requirements, while I think we're all excited about the prospect of $7 billion of capital entering the sector over the next 5 years. And I think in that, I mean, capital takes many different forms. And I was really appreciative of being invited to your investors summit earlier this month to hear from a lot of these capital players about, why they're interested suddenly in agriculture, or maybe have been for quite some time and haven't necessarily seen a receptive space to invest. And so I guess I wonder, as a sector, how can we as farmers make sure that we're seeing that capital translate into investments that really impact us at the farm gate level, and what is the intersection of the needs of the farmers in this room, the farmers they represent around this country, and those capital commitments that we've heard about? Because it's certainly exciting to know that capital is there and it's looking to our sector to invest. But maybe if you could just talk a little bit from your perspective about the mechanics of how we make sure that it's heading in the right places. Because obviously venture capital has one sort of area of focus. There's early seed capital needs. There's more long-term patient infrastructure capital. And I saw all of those different capital players in the room and interested in different facets. So I just really love to hear how you see us as a sector being able to shape and influence that interest and excitement we see from private capital, and make sure it's really resonating and reflecting the priorities we have ourselves, and that what we see from our own understanding of Canada and our economic needs, how do we make sure those two things come together?
Yeah, no. I mean, it's a great question. We could probably talk about it for 2, 3 hours for sure. So I think one of the net advantages, this room holds, and how many times have you seen where somebody with a brilliant idea could be connected to agriculture, create something, but forgets the most important part is connecting with the farmer or the sector, right? So I think one of the areas where, FCC is hoping to really help there is, there's a principle out there where we say capital doesn't necessarily have a border, right? It doesn't see. But how can we make sure that we either convene or connect across the network so that we can get that input early from those that will benefit from that innovation? Like, that's one piece of it. And we see in part through some of the smart farm network, we're starting to see that happen, and we really want to push hard on that. And I'd be remiss if I didn't add the other piece from a Canadian point of view, given that we see things at the national point of view, is how can we better be connected or collaborate across the country? Like I'll often say, there might be something really interesting that's being researched in British Columbia. Well, PEI might be researching exactly the same thing. And there isn't necessarily an incentive in Canada to be able to have that exchange, right? So instead of solving problems together, we could actually be trying to solve the same problem, and both of us in our silo and not bringing it together. So that's definitely an area where I'd say from an FCC point of view, and that's where when we talk about being the catalyst, that's what we mean by being a catalyst, to bring those elements together. The other is, even we've started to take a look at saying, how can we really look at the value chain in its totality and think big in terms of what the potential is. And as a result of that, how does that allow you to tackle some of those either economic problems or opportunities, as Bruce talks about, and how can you convey that in a very quantifiable way so you get the right players at the table. So that's another thing that I think is important. And many of you in this room do this work at your subsector level, but imagine if we can bring it together on one voice, it's going to have a much bigger impact. Yeah.
And I think that actually builds on a conversation. So we had a couple workshops this morning. One of them was on the RD&I space about research, development, innovation. And I've been a part of a lot of conversations over the past few years. And I think it's not only connecting the different subsectors, but a lot of the work I've seen done through BioEnterprise, some of the others that were speaking this morning, really flag that not only is it about the subsectors coming together, but we also have to find a way earlier in those processes to connect, producers or the end user, capital, and the startup tech community as well, to make sure that you're having those conversations early in the process, instead of what often we experience is a startup tech company might come to us or another entity and say, well, we've got this tool and it's great in this other completely different application. Can you find a bunch of farmers to guinea pig it?
Yes.
And I think that doesn't go anywhere for anyone very quickly, because at the end of the day, it's very self-evident that really this isn't something that was designed for farmers or with farmers in mind or the sector at heart. And so that idea of connecting people earlier and often to catalyze investment, not only in general, but at the right time in those processes, is really critical. So I think that really speaks, again, it sings from the same song sheet of a lot of what we've been hearing in that space in particular, and I think more generally as a concern. It's not just about making sure that the grains and oilseed sector and the meat guys are talking, but it's actually ensuring that the right players that aren't even in these rooms necessarily. And that's why I think I really appreciated the Investors Summit was we're bringing new audiences into this discussion in a way where they have a skin in the game now, which is excellent and exciting to see. So maybe just taking a step back from all of this, then we're looking at, we've touched on transitional challenges in terms of moving the sector forward to the next generation. Obviously, trade uncertainty, I think, fills the room and eats up a lot of the oxygen in every room these days. So there's no question there's this continued sense of turbulence. What do you think, if there was one thing we could do collectively as a sector together to help ensure that we have the stability to support that kind of investment moving forward and demonstrate Canada's leadership along the lines that you sort of promoted in that video earlier? What's your one takeaway, I guess, for this audience as to how we can make sure we're working together to build upon that sense of common leadership and stability in our sector and turn that into real meaningful economic opportunity in the future?
Yeah, and it's a great question, Scott. And I really do think it starts by us getting the narrative, like a similar narrative, right? And I've said to different audiences, in my humble opinion, when you go out and you're speaking, you should be thinking of speak from a Canadian point of view, then speak from your subsector point of view, right? If we're all kind of on that Team Canada and we bring together the potential of the sector, and I mean, we've done some number crunching, and you would have heard JP talk about a $30 billion opportunity over the next 10 years, just if we bring back the productivity level that we've had in the last 20 years. But if you were to push forward, so have an outlook view and you say, hey, what could it be like over the next 25 years, right? What could we bring in terms of economic GDP? And you look at it from a total value stream sector, it's probably over 200 billion. Like that to me is kind of almost what we should all start with, right? And say, this is our potential. And then from there, each and every one of you has a role to play within that. But that, to me, the effort and the momentum we've built up to date, I think really has to solidify into that, because I think that's going to get us into those right rooms to then be able to get into the details. And that's the art in all of this, right? It's way easier said than done. And if I may, I mean, that was a little bit the inspiration behind us saying, hey, let's create a platform through which at least we can try to bring together what our messaging is. And within that, you can have different perspectives or different components of it. But trying to get one message that can speak for everybody is probably impossible. But if you bring folks through one door, you can at least rally and get the energy around that and then work at it. So it's a little bit what we're trying to do.
Yeah, and I mean, that certainly resonates very closely with us at CFA. I mean, that is so central to our mandate, is about bringing the sector together with a unified voice. And I couldn't agree more that it sounds great in theory and easy in practice, but the challenge is that front end is getting people into a place where everyone is rowing in the same direction.
Correct.
You might not agree on the details, but I think I heard that come through earlier today in a number of our discussions as well, is those details don't need to stand in the way of the broad consensus I think we as a sector see in all these spaces. And so I think certainly everything we've heard today, I think really resonates with the audience that we have in front of us here today, and a lot of the work we're certainly doing on trying to work together as a sector in a fashion that maybe we haven't always been able to. And I think there's nothing like a shared sense of a crisis to bring everyone together. And hopefully, I think, as we saw with Bruce's presentation, this can translate into something very meaningful and tangible for our sector over time, is this shared sense of, hey, Canadians are paying attention to us in a different light than we have in the past. And to that point, we need to sell a narrative that is not about what we need to exist, but the opportunity we present as an investment for Canadians. And I think that's really what is so exciting to everyone, is we all internally understand what that means in practice and the economic opportunity agriculture presents, but it's not often we have a platform through which we can really connect with Canadians around on that. And we see that today. And so I would applaud the effort to build a tent that everyone can come in under. It's certainly not an easy thing to do. And I think all I can say from a CFA perspective is we've really appreciated the energy and the excitement you always bring to these conversations, and the intention of bringing a sector together that, whether rightly or wrongly, is often, characterized as being incredibly fragmented and diverse. And that, at the end of the day, when you talk about resilience, diversity is a strength. And I think we all need to recognize that and build on that versus view it as something that pulls us apart. So I just really, again, want to extend my appreciation for you coming in, answering our questions, and really getting a sense of where this is going moving forward, because I think there's a lot of excitement, and everyone is, very much to your point, looking for that conduit to channel it through. And so, kudos to FCC for stepping up in that regard. And I think we're all excited to see where we can go moving forward with this. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And I want to thank everybody in the audience, because frankly, it's your stories that are making it exciting, right? So we've been able to capture it. And as I said, I mean, we see the opportunity. It's in the billions. There's so much potential to be able to scale, and this ability for us to come together starts with storytelling. But, ironically, Scott, when we were at the conference a couple of weeks ago, and you can imagine how hard the teams worked on this, at the end of the day, we said, my God, like, this is day zero. Like, this is actually the beginning, right? So there's a lot more to come. And to your point, we're not going to do it on our own. It's got to be done with each and every one of you alongside. So the call of action to you is to come and co-create and partner with us, right? Because that's how we're going to tell the best stories. And when we can see already some of the momentum that's building with the 5 billion, we can see that it's coming together, and we're super excited to see what the next quarters bring up. That's
great. Great takeaway, I think, to leave the room with, and really appreciate your time. And again, at the end of the day, this isn't FCC going it alone. This is a movement that, brings an opportunity for us once again to come together as a sector, like we are in this room together, and really advance this conversation. So thank you again. And again, really appreciate your time.
It's a real honor.
Thanks, Justine.
Okay, thank you.